Claims that Britain is operating a mini Guantanamo Bay in Afghanistan have been dismissed out of hand by a government minister. The UK's Defence Secretary, Philip Hammond, has confirmed to the BBC that as many as 90 people are being held at Britain's largest military base in Afghanistan. He said Britain wants to hand the detainees over to the Afghan authorities, but hasn't been able to do so because of the possibility that they may be mistreated. In a moment, we'll be speaking live to our correspondent in Kabul. But first, Clive Coleman reports on the legal efforts here in the UK to get the men either charged or released.
Housing nearly 30,000 servicemen and women, Camp Bastion is the largest British military base in Afghanistan. And within it, a prison where it's claimed that as many as 85 Afghans are being illegally detained. This man, who doesn't want to be identified, says his cousin has been held for 13 months.
He told us that he cannot get any information about the reason for his arrest. He asks us to find out information in the governor's office or find information from somewhere else about why he's in prison or how long he will be held. He asked us to find out the charges against him as he did not commit any crimes and he was not in possession of anything illegal.
UK forces operate as part of the International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF. They're allowed to detain for 96 hours and in exceptional circumstances to gather intelligence to protect lives for longer periods. But according to the MOD itself, there's no power to intern. The BBC has seen court documents for 8 of the men who are using the English courts to mount a legal challenge to their detention. They were picked up in army raids in villages in Helmand and Kandahar provinces and have been held for between 8 and 14 months. Today, the Defence Secretary acknowledged the existence of the detention facility.
We are holding a number of people in the temporary holding facility at Camp Bastion, far more than we would like to be holding. We would like nothing more to be able to hand these people over to the Afghan authorities so that they can go properly through the Afghan judicial system.
These detentions pose extremely awkward questions for the government about the lawfulness of a policy of detention that few seem to know much about. Clive Coleman, BBC News.
All right, let's go live now to the Afghan capital, Kabul, and talk to our correspondent there, David Loyne. And David, a reaction in Afghanistan has been quite swift.
Yes, it has. Afghanistan has taken a very strong view about foreign governments that continue to hold prisoners here. It's soured relations between the Afghan government and the American government. Finally, the Bagram detention facility was handed over to full Afghan control in March this year. And when the existence of this facility in Camp Bastion and the fact that Britain was still holding Afghan prisoners rather than handing them over first emerged at the end of last year, President Karzai made some very strong accusations against Britain and demanded that they should be handed over immediately. This is what, when it emerged today that there are still people being held there and that they've been held for more than a year, some of them, this is what General Azimi, the spokesman for the Afghan Ministry of Defence, told the BBC.
This is against Afghan law. It is also inhuman. The prisoners should be handed over to the Afghan authorities after 96 hours. After they're handed over to us, they'll be dealt with according to our judicial laws and the agreements reached with the international community.
And David, there, the Afghan spokesman, didn't seem to deal at all with the issue that Britain thinks that if they hand over these prisoners to the Afghan authorities, that there is a possibility they'll be mistreated.
That's the legal dilemma, the moral dilemma that Britain faces, and it puts them, if you like, in a legal lose-lose situation and leaves these men in a kind of legal limbo, not facing trial, not being handed over to Afghan justice, not being released, but in this facility in Camp Bastion. The problem for Britain is that while, yes, they are facing these claims in British courts now that they've held people without trial for many of them many months, if they hand them over to Afghan authorities. They have faced accusations before and court cases before that these men will be tortured. There are well-attested cases of torture in Afghan facilities, and Britain, and I have to say Australia as well, is not handing over prisoners at the moment until this issue is resolved. But we heard from Mr. Hammond today a new fact. The British Defence Secretary says he hopes that this will be resolved within a matter of days, and that means he is presumably that this logjam will end and that some of these prisoners will be handed over to face Afghan justice.
All right, thank you for that. David Loyne, our correspondent there, live in Kabul. Let's get back to our main story now, and that of the UK having confirmed that around 90 Afghan nationals are being held without charge or trial at one of its largest military bases in Afghanistan. We can go live now to Westminster and join our chief political correspondent, Norman Smith. And Norman, Philip Hammond, the Defence Secretary, has described the situation facing the government as a pretty peculiar predicament, really, isn't it? Because it's a situation where they feel that they can't let these detainees loose into the Afghan judicial system, and they don't know what else to do with them.
Well, more than that, they are blaming the lawyers representing some of these Afghan detainees for creating this legal catch-22, because the view of the British government is they are absolutely not going to release these people because they view them as people who've tried to kill British soldiers, so they're not going to simply release them. But on the other hand, they cannot hand them over to the Afghan prosecuting authorities, not merely because there are concerns about the well-being of these detainees once they're handed over to the Afghans, but precisely because some of these lawyers have taken a court action in Britain to stop any of the detainees being handed over because of concerns about their safety. So as a result, more and more detainees are now being held at Camp Bastion in this kind of legal limbo situation. But I have to say there is real anger in government circles at the suggestion from some of the lawyers that the UK government is operating some sort of, quotes, mini Guantanamo, because the argument is very far from any sort of mistreatment or waterboarding of the detainees. The British government is actually holding the detainees there for their own well-being, and far from it being secret, Parliament has actually been told about this by the Defence Secretary. So I have to say there is considerable anger in government at the comments by lawyers representing some of these detainees.
All right, Norman, thanks for that. Norman Smith, our chief political correspondent there, live from Westminster.